A werewolf shifter romance audiobook written by Jane. Cold. That was the first thing she knew. The first thing that was real. A deep, biting cold that seeped from the stone floor, climbing up her spine and sinking into her bones. Her cheek was pressed flat against the rough, gritty surface, and the damp smell of earth and mildew filled her nose. She didn't know what scared her more, the cold, or the fact that she couldn't remember her own name. Her eyes cracked open. Darkness, but not complete. Before she could move, a faint, sickly light from somewhere above revealed the edges of her world. Bars. Thick, heavy bars that didn't gleam like steel. Instead, they seemed to swallow the light, casting back a dull, milky white sheen. Silver. The word appeared in her mind, a foreign thought that felt sharp and dangerous. Why did she know that? And why did the sight of it make her want to shrink away? Her breath caught. With every heartbeat, a new wave of panic crested. She pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest, her joints aching. A thin, ragged shift was all she wore, offering no protection from the chill. She scrambled backward until her back hit the stone wall behind her. Her world was a cage, a small circular cage of cold stone and soft, hungry silver. What was this place? Who am I? The question echoed in the void of her mind, and no answer came back. Only the sound of her own ragged breathing, like in something else. Her heart skipped, footsteps. Her instincts surged, heavy, screaming at her to hide, to run, to fight, but where could she go? She pressed herself harder against the stone, trying to melt into the shadows, making herself small. The footsteps stopped just outside the bars. A shadow fell over her, immense and terrifying, blocking out the meager light. And just like that, everything changed. The shadow took shape. The shape of a man. A giant. He ducked to enter the low opening, his presence instantly shrinking the already tiny cell. He was a mountain of muscle and raw power, dressed in simple leather pants and boots. His dark hair was shorn close on the sides, longer on top, and his face was all hard angles and shadow, dominated by a jaw that looked like it could crack stone. But his eyes. In the dim light, they seemed to glow with a strange internal fire, an impossible shade of gold, and they were fixed on her. He didn't speak. The silence stretched thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic drumming of her own heart. He just stood there, watching her, his expression a mask of cold control. Yet, deep down, she knew the truth. Beneath the stillness, something wild was coiled tight, a predator assessing its prey. Her body moved on instinct. She drew her knees to her chest, a useless shield. Who was he? What did he want? Maybe it was fate that brought her here, to this cage, to this man. Or maybe it was something far, far worse. The moment their eyes locked, she felt it, clear as day. A jolt. A spark of something ancient and terrifying that had absolutely no place in the world she knew, or the world she couldn't remember. He took a slow step forward, and she let out a small, broken whimper she couldn't hold back. The space between them burned. His golden eyes narrowed at the sound. A muscle in his jaw twitched, the only sign that he'd even heard her. He stopped, still several feet away, yet his presence was an overwhelming weight. The air thickened, charged with his scent. Pine, winter air, and something else. Something fiercely masculine and utterly wild. With every step he took, her pulse raced. He was the storm, and she was just a leaf caught in his path. He crouched down, moving with a fluid grace that was terrifying in a man so large. Not only was he strong, he was fast. He could cross the space between them in the span of a breath. He set a wooden plate and a cup of water on the floor, just inside the bars, his movements economical and precise. Then he looked at her again. Under the weight of his stare, she felt pinned, like a butterfly under glass. It wasn't a look of lust or even simple anger. It was something far more complex, more intense. It was a look of possession, of appraisal, as if he was weighing every piece of her, from her tangled, nameless hair to the frantic pulse beating in her throat. What did he see? A broken girl? A prisoner? Because of that, a flicker of defiance sparked within her fear. She would not be just a thing in a cage. No matter how hard she tried to be brave, her voice trembled when she finally spoke, the words raw and scratchy. Who are you?" The silence that followed was a living thing. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer, that he would just stand up and leave her in this suffocating quiet. But then his voice came, a low rumble that vibrated through the stone floor and straight into her bones. Riker. Just one word. Her name hung in the air, a threat and a promise all at once. He was Riker, and deep down, a part of her she didn't know existed seemed to remember that name, to recoil from it. In the quiet that followed, she felt a strange, phantom tingle on her shoulder, a place his eyes kept being drawn to. Why? What was he looking for? He rose to his full, intimidating height. He didn't say what he wanted or why she was here. Truth be told, his silence was a far more effective form of torture. It left her mind to spin, to imagine the worst possible horrors. That's why she found herself speaking again, desperate to fill the void. "Please, let me go." Riker's expression didn't change, but something in those golden eyes flickered. A flash of, what? Regret? Pain? It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that unnerving, cold resolve. He didn't just want her here, he needed her here. She could feel it, which meant her being here was important, not random. And that was somehow even more terrifying. Without another word, he turned and ducked out of the cell. The bolt slid shut with a deafening finality. His footsteps retreated, leaving her alone once more. Alone with his name. Riker. And the chilling, unanswered question of why. When he looked at her, she felt like she was a key he was desperate to turn in a lock he feared to open. Her world tilted. Something inside her shifted. That night, as she forced down the dry bread and cold water, she stared at the silver bars, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her more than the stone that this was no ordinary prison. This was a cage built for a monster. So what, then, did that make her? Sleep offered no escape. It came in fractured, restless waves filled with shadows that had golden eyes and a scent like a winter forest. By the time a sliver of gray morning light filtered into her cell, she felt more exhausted than before. Riker did not return. Instead, a silent, grim-faced woman with tired eyes left food and water, refusing to meet her gaze. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on her, making her thoughts spin. Who was she? Why was she here? Was Riker the leader of these people? And what did he want from her? She spent hours tracing the mortar between the stones with her finger, trying to find a single memory, a single clue to her own past. Nothing. It was a black, empty wall. The frustration boiled over, hot and helpless, leaving her chest aching with a hollow sense of loss for a life she couldn't even recall. Maybe it was fate that she was a blank slate. Because of that, maybe she was better off not knowing what had led her to this cage. She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cold stone wall. She focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, trying to find a center in the terrifying emptiness. And just like that, everything changed. Without warning, the world behind her eyelids exploded into brilliant, impossible color. It wasn't a thought. It was a place. As if pulled by a string, her mind soared. She saw a forest, but not a normal forest. The trees were ancient and impossibly tall, their leaves a vibrant, shimmering green. Sunlight, thick and golden like honey, streamed through the canopy, dappling a forest floor covered in soft emerald moss. The air smelled of damp earth, sweet blossoms, and life. So much life. She could feel the pulse of it, a gentle, rhythmic beat that resonated with something deep inside her. A river, clearer than any glass, wound through the trees. and in the center of a sun-drenched clearing stood a massive, withered tree. But as she watched, a shimmer of light ran up its trunk. A single green leaf unfurled from a dead branch. The vision shattered. Pain, sharp and blinding, lanced through her skull. A gasp ripped from her lips, and she pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, her breath coming in ragged pants. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear, but with a strange, powerful ache of longing, of homesickness for a place she'd never seen. What was that? A dream? A memory? Deep down, she knew the truth. It was more than a memory. It felt like a promise. A growl, low and guttural, echoed from outside her cell, startling her. Riker. He was nearby. Could he sense it? Could he know what just happened inside her mind? Her body moved on instinct. She smoothed her features, erasing the shock and the pain, banking the wonder of the vision deep inside her. She didn't know what it meant, but it was hers. The first thing that felt truly hers since waking up in this cold stone cage. And she would not give it to him. As the silence stretched, she hugged her secret close. Let him think she was just a broken, nameless girl. Let him watch her with those intense, possessive, golden eyes. She had something he couldn't see. A world inside her head. A secret garden. And that small, secret power felt more precious and more dangerous than any freedom she could imagine. The moment the vision faded, a new resolve settled in her bones. She would survive this, and she would find out what that beautiful, impossible forest meant, no matter what it took. The key wasn't her past she couldn't remember. It was the future she had just seen. The sound of the bolt scraping open was different this time. It wasn't for food. It wasn't for a silent, intimidating stare. This sound was violent, impatient. Before she could even scramble to her feet, Riker filled the doorway. And this time, he came for her. "Get up," he commanded, his voice a low growl that left no room for argument. Her breath caught. Without thinking, her body moved on instinct, pressing back against the unyielding stone. But there was nowhere to go. He stepped inside, and his large hand wrapped around her upper arm. A jolt, hot and electric, shot through her at his touch. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. Something terrifyingly alive. As if pulled by a string, he hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, her legs weak. Where are you taking me?" she gasped out. He didn't answer. Instead, he just pulled her forward, his grip like a steel band. They reached the threshold of the cell, and her terror spiked. The silver bars. She was going to have to pass them. As her shoulder brushed against the milky white metal, a searing, sizzling pain erupted against her skin. A scream tore from her lips. It felt like fire. Like a piece of her soul was being burned away. Tears sprang to her eyes, and she tried to pull back, but his grip was relentless. He dragged her through the opening and into a dark stone corridor. The burning faded to a vicious, angry sting on her shoulder, but the memory of the pain made her tremble uncontrollably. Why did it hurt her so much? What was she? As he pulled her down the hallway, she could only see his broad, unyielding back. He was a force of nature, a storm she was trapped inside. And the strangest thing happened. Between one breath and the next, despite her terror, she felt a bizarre pull toward him. A stupid, insane desire to press her face into his back and hide from the world. To hide from him. Her thoughts spun. Maybe it was some kind of sickness of the mind, born from fear and isolation. Or maybe it was something far, far worse. Because deep down, she knew the truth. A part of her, a deep and primal part, wasn't trying to get away from him at all. It was trying to get closer.
The moment his fingers closed around her arm, his wolf howled. Her skin was so soft, so fragile. His beast, the other half of his soul, wanted to wrap her in furs, to feed her, to soothe the terror he saw in her wide, haunted eyes. But he couldn't. Not only was his pack dying, but the elders were growing restless. The prophecy was his only hope, a desperate, flimsy shield against the creeping blight that was poisoning his land and his people. He had to know if she was the one, which meant he had to break her, or at least break through whatever wall was holding her power back. So he hardened his heart. He ignored the frantic beating of his own wolf's rage. "Mate," the beast snarled in his mind. "You hurt our mate." He dragged her toward the threshold. He knew the silver would burn her. He felt the phantom sting of it himself, a deep ache in his bones. As her scream ripped through the air, it was like a blade twisting in his own gut. He had to grit his teeth to keep from stopping, to keep from turning and crushing her against his chest to apologize. He had to do this, because there were no other options left. The land was failing. The sickness was spreading, and his time as Alpha was running out. He was failing them. As a result, this girl, this nameless, memoryless girl whose scent was the only sweet thing left in his rotting world, was his last chance. Her scent. It was wild lavender and rain, a clean and beautiful smell that drove his wolf insane with need. And beneath it, the sharp, acidic tang of her fear, a fear he was causing. It made him want to tear down the stone walls with his bare hands. To make things worse, as he pulled her along, he could feel the fine tremors running through her body. He could feel the frantic, bird-like flutter of her pulse against his palm. Everything in him, man and wolf, screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to tell her, what? That he was sorry? That he felt this insane pull to her? This bond that the moon itself had blessed? Telling her the truth would only terrify her more. She wouldn't understand the bond. She wouldn't understand what it meant to be a fated mate, especially to a monster who had caged her. So, he held on to his silence. He let her think he was a cold, cruel beast. It was better that way, because if she knew the truth, that he was terrified of failing, that he was more broken than she was, and that she was the only thing that felt like hope in his entire, desolate world, she would have more power over him than any Alpha should ever allow. And that he could not afford. Not yet.
He dragged her out of the keep and into the gray dying light. The world outside was a wasteland. The sky was a sheet of flat, colorless gray. The trees were skeletal claws reaching for a sky that offered no comfort. Even the air felt wrong, thin and sharp, carrying a scent of decay that made her stomach churn. Her beautiful vision of a vibrant forest felt like a cruel joke now, a paradise lost. Or maybe a paradise that had never existed at all. Riker didn't slow down. He pulled her across a cracked and barren courtyard, his boots crunching on dead leaves and dry earth. He was heading toward the center of the wasteland, toward a single gargantuan tree. It was dead. Utterly and completely dead. Its trunk was a twisted mass of gray, petrified wood, and its branches were black, splintered things that looked like charred bones. It was a monument to despair. And yet, her soul answered it. A faint, sad echo resonated from the tree, a whisper of the life it once held. Riker finally stopped before the dead giant, his chest heaving slightly. He shoved her forward, not hard, but with an undeniable command. "This is the heart tree," he growled, his voice tight with a terrible, desperate energy. "It was the heart of our land, the heart of our pack, and now it is dying. We are dying." She stared at him, then at the tree, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. What does this have to do with me? "The prophecy says a daughter of the moon, an heir of the lost line, will come and heal the land," he said, his golden eyes burning into her. "It says the key is in her blood, in her touch." He gestured wildly at the tree. "So, touch it. Do something. Fix it." His voice cracked on the last word, raw with a pain so deep it startled her. In that moment, he wasn't just a monster. He was a desperate man watching his world crumble. Her heart ached for him, a feeling so insane and out of place that it made her dizzy. Still, she shook her head, tears welling in her eyes again. "I can't," she whispered, the words tasting like failure. I don't know who I am. I don't know how. With a roar of pure frustration, Riker slammed his fist against the dead trunk of the tree. The sound was like a gunshot, and she flinched hard. A large piece of petrified bark cracked and fell to the ground. "Then what good are you?" he roared, not at her, but at the empty sky, at his cruel fate. His pain was a tangible thing, a storm raging around them. She wanted to reach out, to soothe him, but she was frozen. She was the source of his hope and the source of his despair, all at once. And she had no idea how to be anything else.
Watching her stand before the heart tree, so small and fragile, he felt his control snap. This was it, the moment of truth. He had brought her here because the legends were clear. The touch of the true heir would awaken the tree. It was a simple test, a final, desperate gamble. When she just stared at it, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, his hope began to curdle into bitter rage. He had staked everything on this, on her, and she was nothing. Just a girl. "Fix it," he yelled, the command tearing from his throat. The fear in her eyes was a physical blow. Her whispered, "I can't," was the final nail in the coffin of his hope. "Lies," his wolf snarled. "She is our mate. She is everything. You are the failure." The beast's fury mixed with his own, and he lashed out, his fist connecting with the dead wood of the tree. The impact sent a shockwave of pain up his arm, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. He had failed. The prophecy was a lie, or she was the wrong girl, which meant his pack was truly doomed. He turned his back on her, unable to look at her terrified face for another second. He needed to get her away from him before he did something he couldn't take back, before he fell to his knees and begged her to be the miracle he so desperately needed. As he stared out at his dying lands, he caught a flicker of movement. From the edge of the woods, he saw Ilara, the pack's eldest den mother, watching them. Her expression was one of deep sorrow and disappointment, and it was aimed directly at him. He knew what she was thinking, that he was being a cruel, thoughtless brute. And she was right. Truth be told, that's why he had to be this way. He couldn't show weakness, not now. Not when other packs were sniffing at their borders, sensing their decay. He had to be the strong alpha, even if he felt like he was turning to dust inside. He took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing his wolf's rage back down. Yelling at the girl would solve nothing. Caging her had solved nothing. Maybe he was going about this all wrong. He had been treating her like a key, a thing. But the prophecy didn't speak of a key. It spoke of a daughter, an heir, a person. And you couldn't force a person to do anything.
Riker turned his back on her, his broad shoulders stiff with a rage that seemed to radiate from him in waves. She stayed perfectly still, terrified that any movement would draw his fury back to her. He was a volcano, and she was standing at its very edge. After a long, tense silence, he stalked away without another word, leaving her alone in the shadow of the dead heart tree. A moment later, 2 guards appeared from the woods, their faces grim and unreadable. They didn't touch her, but stood a few feet away, their message clear. She was still a prisoner. She wrapped her arms around herself, the chill of the air sinking deep into her bones. She had failed. She didn't know what the test was, but she had failed it spectacularly. And now she was sure he would throw her back in that dark silver cage. Her chest ached with a despair so heavy it was hard to breathe. But then, a new figure emerged from the trees. It was an older woman, her long hair a cascade of silver gray, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles that spoke of many hard seasons. Her eyes, unlike the others, were not cold or suspicious. They were a warm, gentle brown, and they were filled with a deep, profound sadness. She recognized her. It was the woman from the keep, the one who had spoken with kindness. The woman approached slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal. In her hands, she held a thick woolen cloak. "He forgets himself," the woman said, her voice soft and melodic. "The blight makes us all desperate. It makes us forget who we are." She came to a stop in front of Alara and gently draped the heavy cloak over her shoulders. The warmth was immediate and wonderful, a shocking comfort in this cold, dead place. "My name is also Alara," the elder said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "I am the Den Mother." The kindness was so unexpected, it broke something inside her. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cold cheek. The Den Mother reached out and gently brushed it away with her thumb. "There now, little one. Fear is a poison, but it doesn't have to kill you," she murmured. "He may be the alpha, but the heart of the pack still beats with compassion. You are not just a prisoner to us." This small act, this simple human touch, was a lifeline. It was a spark of warmth in the suffocating cold of her fear. And in that moment, a decision formed in her mind. She would not just survive. She would not just escape. She would understand. She would find out what this blight was, what the prophecy meant, and what that vision of a living forest was trying to tell her. She would take control. That was the only way she would ever truly be free. As if fate demanded it, she looked up at the Den Mother, a new resolve hardening her gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time. The Den Mother simply nodded, her warm eyes holding a universe of ancient knowledge. She knew this was a turning point, and Alara knew that her journey wasn't about escaping a cage anymore. It was about finding out why she was the one meant to hold the key. From the edge of the keep, he watched. He saw Alara, the Den Mother, approach the girl. He saw her drape the cloak over her shoulders. He should have stopped her. The prisoner needed to be kept isolated, off balance. It was the tactical thing to do, but he couldn't. Because his wolf, the beast he had been fighting since the moment he first saw the girl, went completely still and quiet in his mind. Not with rage, but with a deep, humming sense of approval. "Our mate is cold," the wolf whispered. "The pack provides. This is the way." He watched as the girl's entire posture changed. Her shoulders straightened. The frantic terror in her eyes was replaced by something else, something strong and focused. He watched her thank the Den Mother, her voice carrying on the thin, cold air. She wasn't broken. He had thrown his rage and desperation at her, and she had bent, but she had not broken. A grudging, painful respect bloomed in his chest. Maybe the prophecy wasn't a lie. Maybe his methods were just wrong. You don't take a sledgehammer to a delicate, ancient lock. You find the right key and you turn it gently. His first instinct, to cage her, to force her, to command her, had failed. It was the instinct of a brute, of a failing alpha. But the Den Mother's instinct, to offer warmth, compassion, a connection, had sparked a visible change in the girl. He hated that it wasn't him who had given her that comfort. The jealousy was a sharp, bitter taste in his mouth. But he was the alpha. He was her captor. He could not be her comfort. Not now. But he could change the cage. He turned to one of his guards. "Take her from the heart tree. Prepare the North Tower room. She is to be moved from the cells." The guard looked at him, his expression shocked. "Alpha? The tower? But do it!" Riker snapped, his authority returning like a familiar cloak. "She is no use to us locked in the dark. I want her where I can see her, where the pack can see her. Let her see what's at stake." It was a tactical decision, he told himself, a change in strategy. But as he turned and walked back into the cold gray stone of his keep, he knew the truth. He just couldn't bear the thought of her sleeping on that cold stone floor for one more night. He couldn't stand the thought of those silver bars keeping her in the dark. He was changing the strategy because he had to, but he was also changing it for her. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. The guards led her not to the dark cells, but up a winding stone staircase. Her new prison was a room at the top of a tower. A real room. It had a narrow bed with a threadbare but clean blanket, a small wooden table, and a window. After the oppressive dark of the cell, it felt like a palace. Yet it was still a cage, a larger, prettier cage. The moment the heavy wooden door shut behind her, She moved to the window, her breath catching. From here, she could see the entire pack's settlement, a collection of stone and timber buildings huddled together as if for warmth, surrounded by a dying forest. And she could see the people. Her chest ached. They moved slowly, their shoulders slumped with a weariness that went deeper than bone. She saw a woman carrying a bucket of water, her face gaunt and pale. She saw two men leaning against a wall, their skin having a sickly grayish tint. Even the children playing in the dirt seemed to move with a strange lethargy, their laughter thin and brittle. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't just a pack in decline. This was a people being slowly poisoned. The blight Riker spoke of wasn't just in the land, it was in them. Her problem, her imprisonment, suddenly felt so small, so selfish. An entire world was fading to gray right outside her window, and she was somehow standing at the center of it. Why? She turned from the window and let her fingers trail along the cold, rough-hewn stone of the wall. It felt ancient, humming with a faint, dormant energy. Maybe it was fate that she was brought here, to this room, to this window. Because now, she understood. Riker's cruelty wasn't born from malice. It was born from sheer, soul-crushing desperation, and that was a much more complicated thing to hate. She sank onto the bed, the thin mattress groaning beneath her. She pulled the woolen cloak the den mother had given her tighter around her shoulders, its warmth a small comfort. Her gaze fell upon her own hands, pale and trembling slightly. What could these hands possibly do to fix a world so broken? The answer, she feared, was nothing at all, and that fear was colder than any stone floor.
He watched her from the shadows of the courtyard below. He saw her appear in the tower window, a small, lonely silhouette against the gray light. He had told his men he wanted her moved so he could watch her, a tactical decision. But truth be told, he was watching her because he couldn't look away. His wolf was calmer now that she was out of the silver-laced cell. The frantic, clawing rage had subsided, replaced by a low, constant hum of awareness. Mate is safe. Mate is warm. Safe, but not happy. He could see the sorrow in her posture even from this distance. He saw her look down upon his people and he felt a hot sting of shame. He was their alpha. Their sickness, their weakness, was his failure. And now he was showing that failure to her, the one person who might be able to judge him for it. He had to move her, because the cells were a dead end. Not only that, he needed to see if proximity to his people, to their suffering, would stir something within her. The den mother's act of kindness had sparked a change. Perhaps the collective pain of the pack could do the same. It was a cruel calculation, a necessary one. More importantly, he needed to understand the connection he felt. It wasn't just the fated mate bond. He had heard stories of the bond his whole life, but none spoke of this. This feeling that she was a missing piece of his own soul. When she was in pain, his own skin burned. When she was afraid, his own wolf snarled. He looked up at her window again. She had turned away. Good. He didn't want her looking at him. He didn't want her to see the conflict in his own eyes. The hope warring with the despair. The alpha warring with the man warring with the beast. He was a battlefield of one, and she was the prize they were all fighting over. A young pup, no older than 5, stumbled near him, his breathing a ragged, painful-sounding wheeze. The boy's mother rushed over, scooping him into her arms, her face etched with fear. Riker looked away, a muscle in his jaw tightening. That's why he had to do this. Because of that little boy. Because of all of them. He would use this girl. He would use her hope, her fear, her mysterious power. He would use her to save his pack, and he would hate himself for it, every single step of the way.
Days bled into one another in a haze of gray monotony. A silent guard brought her meals. She spent hours at the window, watching the slow, sad dance of the pack below. The ache of empathy was a constant companion. But the vision, it did not return. Her frustration grew. Was it just a one-time fluke? A dream born of stress and fear? She began to pace her small room, a restless energy buzzing beneath her skin. As she passed the wall beside her bed, she stumbled, her hand flying out to steady herself against the ancient stones. And in that moment, the world dissolved. The vision slammed into her, stronger this time, more vivid. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a memory. Not hers, but the stones. The air thickened. She was standing in a forest alive with shimmering green light. Before her stood the great heart tree, not dead and skeletal, but vibrant with life. And carved into its trunk was a symbol. A towering tree, its roots and branches intertwined in an intricate knot. And resting above the branches, a crown. The crowned tree. The king's tree. A voice, deep and resonant like the ringing of a great bell, echoed through the vision. As long as the heir sits on the throne of the wood, the land will provide. As long as the blood remains true, the pack will endure. Pain ripped through her head, and she gasped, stumbling back from the wall. The room swam back into focus. She was breathing heavily, her heart pounding. Her hand, the one that had touched the wall, tingled with a strange, residual energy. It was the stone. The ancient stone of the keep was the trigger. As the silence stretched, a wild, dangerous idea took root. She looked around her room, her eyes landing on the stone floor, the window ledge, the fireplace. They were all made of the same ancient rock. Without thinking, she knelt and pressed her palm flat against the cold floor. Nothing. She moved to the window ledge. Again, nothing. It was only that one section of the wall. Why? What was different about it? She ran her fingers over the spot again, feeling for any difference in texture, and she found it. A faint, almost invisible line in the mortar. A hairline crack, as if this stone was separate from the others. Her thoughts spun. She had a secret, a real, tangible secret. She had a way to access that other world, that memory. It was a power she could control. A small smile, the first genuine smile since she'd woken up, touched her lips. This was better than a key to escape her cage. This was a key to understanding why she was in it.
Another day, another report of the blight creeping closer. A stream to the east had turned black overnight, its water now thick and foul. He slammed the report down on his heavy oak desk, a low growl rising in his throat. Time was running out. He stalked to his window, which looked out over the same courtyard as the girl's tower. He could see her, a silhouette pacing back and forth, back and forth. For days, she had done this. A caged animal, wearing a path in the floor of her prison. He felt a pang of something he refused to name. Guilt? Pity? It didn't matter. His pity wouldn't save his people. His wolf, however, was less pragmatic. She is restless, the beast rumbled. The cage is too small. Our mate needs to run. She is not our mate, Riker muttered under his breath, a lie he repeated 100 times a day. She is a tool, a key. Liar, the wolf answered simply. He watched as she suddenly stopped her pacing. She knelt down, pressing her hand to the floor. Then she moved to the window, then back to the wall. What was she doing? Was it a game to pass the time? A sign of her mind starting to crack from the isolation? To make things worse, he saw a faint smile touch her lips. A smile. What in this dying world could she possibly have to smile about? A cold knot of suspicion tightened in his gut. She was hiding something. That quiet, fearful act was just that. An act. Beneath it, there was a core of strength he had underestimated. She had secrets, the vision he had hoped for. What if she had already had it, and simply chosen not to tell him? The thought was infuriating. It made him want to storm up to that tower and demand answers. But he held himself back. Force had failed him once already. He had to be smarter. He had to be patient. So he watched. He would watch her every move. He would learn her routines, her habits, her secrets. He had placed her in the heart of his keep, surrounded by his people and his pain. Sooner or later she would have to show her hand, and when she did, he would be ready. The fate of his pack, of his entire world, depended on it. He would not fail them again.
The knock on her door was soft, but it made her jump. It wasn't one of the silent, grim-faced guards. When the door opened, the den mother, Alara, stood there, her warm brown eyes filled with a worried light. "The little one, Caden, his fever is worse," she said, her voice strained. "I know this is much to ask, but the healers can do no more. When you were near him before, he seemed to rest easier. Will you come?" Her heart skipped. It wasn't a command. It was a request, a plea. Before she could think, before she could weigh the risks, she was nodding. Yes, of course. The den mother led her down from the tower and into the main hall of the keep, which had been turned into a makeshift infirmary. The air was heavy with the smell of sickness and herbal remedies. Cots lined the walls, each one holding a sick or dying wolf. The sight of so much suffering was a physical blow. Alara led her to a small cot in the corner, where a little boy lay shivering under a pile of furs, his face flushed with fever, his breath coming in shallow, painful gasps. This was the boy she had seen from her window. Caden. As she looked at him, an overwhelming wave of empathy washed over her. It was a powerful, instinctual pull. Her own aches and fears faded away. All that mattered was the small, suffering child in front of her. "What can I do?" she whispered. "Just sit with him," the den mother said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Sometimes a gentle presence is its own medicine." She pulled up a small stool and Alara sat. She looked at the boy's small, pained face. Without thinking, she reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of sweaty hair from his forehead. As her skin touched his, it happened. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a memory. It was a flow. A soft, gentle warmth bloomed from her palm, flowing from her into the boy. It felt like pouring a cup of warm, liquid light into a cold, empty vessel. It was the most natural thing she had ever done. Beneath her touch, the frantic shivering of the boy's body began to calm. His breathing, which had been ragged and shallow, deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of peaceful sleep. The angry, flushed color of his skin softened to a healthier, rosy pink. The fever hadn't broken completely, but it had receded. He was resting. Truly resting. Tears pricked Alara's eyes. She did that. She had done that. The air shifted. The tension in the room broke. She felt a presence behind her and looked up. Riker was standing in the shadows of the doorway, his golden eyes wide. The cold, hard mask of the Alpha was gone. In its place was a look of raw, unguarded, breathtaking awe. He wasn't looking at a prisoner, or a key, or a tool. He was looking at a miracle, and in his eyes she saw a terrifying, beautiful, and world-shattering hope. A hope that was now aimed directly at her.
He had followed the den mother. He was furious that she had taken the girl from the tower without his permission. He was the Alpha. His orders were absolute. He had stormed down the corridors, ready to unleash his authority, ready to remind everyone who was in charge. And then he saw it. He stopped in the doorway of the great hall, hidden in the shadows. He saw the girl sit beside the cot of Caden, the sickest of all the pack's children. He had already accepted the boy would be lost by morning. The healers had given up hope. He watched her reach out, her touch so gentle, so hesitant. And he watched the impossible happen. He couldn't see the light she felt, but he could see its effects. It was as clear as day. The boy's tormented shivering ceased. The painful rasp of his breathing smoothed into peaceful sighs. The pallor of death receded from the child's skin. It was real. The prophecy. The legends. The desperate, dying hope he had been clinging to. It was all real. His wolf, the beast he had been fighting for weeks, rose up inside him not with a snarl, but with a roar of pure, triumphant joy. "Mate," It howled in his soul. She is life. She is our salvation. For the first time, he didn't fight the beast. He let the feeling wash over him, a tidal wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. The weight of his dying pack, a burden that had been crushing him for months, suddenly felt lighter. He stepped out of the shadows. He couldn't help himself. Her eyes, those wide, haunted, beautiful eyes, lifted to meet his. He saw the shock in them, the wonder. She was as stunned by what she had done as he was. The space between them crackled with a new and potent energy. All the lines had been redrawn. She wasn't his prisoner anymore. He wasn't her captor. He was a dying king, and she was the goddess of life who had just walked into his blighted kingdom. He didn't know what to say. Thank you felt too small. I'm sorry felt like a lie. So he just stood there, letting her see the truth in his eyes. The awe, the reverence, the hope. As the truth unraveled between them, something cracked. The foundation of their dynamic, captor and captive, alpha and pawn, shattered into a million pieces. And in its place, something new and terrifyingly fragile began to grow.
The dynamic between them had changed completely. Riker was no longer her cold, distant captor. In fact, he was a whirlwind of intense, focused energy. The hope she had seen in his eyes had ignited into a burning fire. And she was the fuel. He took her from the keep the next morning. But then, instead of dragging her, he walked beside her, his presence a constant, heavy weight. He didn't speak of prophecies or demands. Instead, he asked questions, his deep voice urgent and low. What did it feel like when you touched the boy? She struggled to find the words. It was warm, like pouring light into a cup. Can you feel it now? He pressed, his golden eyes searching her face. No, she admitted, her chest aching with the fear of disappointing him. It's gone. He led her to a river, but it was nothing like the beautiful, clear stream from her vision. This river was dead. The water was a slick black sludge that smelled of rot and decay, and the banks were lined with a sickly gray mud. This is the Blackwood River, Riker said, his voice tight. It was once the lifeblood of this valley. Now it is a vein of poison. He turned to her, his gaze so intense it was hard to breathe. Try. Please. Her heart skipped. He had said please. She wanted to. More than anything, she wanted to give him the miracle he was so desperate for. She knelt at the edge of the foul-smelling river, the mud squelching beneath her boots. She took a deep breath and reached out, plunging her hand into the cold, oily water. Nothing. There was no warmth, no flow of light, just a disgusting, icy chill that made her skin crawl. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the feeling she'd had with the child, trying to picture the living forest from her vision. Still nothing. A tear of frustration slipped from her eye. I can't, she choked out, pulling her hand back. It's not working. The disappointment that flashed across Riker's face was like a physical blow, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that fierce, stubborn resolve. Try again, he commanded, though his voice was softer this time. She looked from his desperate face to the dead river. She felt like a failure. She was a hollow key that refused to turn, and she was letting his entire world die.
He watched her kneel, a small, determined figure against the vast backdrop of his failure. Hope was a painful, unfamiliar thing in his chest. It made him feel raw and exposed. When she touched the water, he held his breath. He willed the magic to work, poured all his own desperate energy toward her, as if he could fuel her power himself. The moment her face fell, the moment she whispered, "I can't," that fragile hope fractured. His first instinct was to roar in frustration, to demand she try harder. But he choked it back. He remembered his failure at the heart tree. Force was not the answer. "Patience, brother," his wolf rumbled, for once the calmer of the two. "She is not a weapon to be aimed. She is a flower, It will bloom when it is ready, a flower in the middle of a wasteland. His gaze swept the dead trees surrounding them. He had posted his best warriors, Kale and Yorick, in the woods as sentinels. He knew that the display in the infirmary, though small, might as well have been a signal flare. Any pack with a seer would have felt the shift in the land's energy, which meant they were exposed. They were vulnerable. That's why he had pushed her to come here today. Because he knew their time for quiet experimentation was running out. He saw the tear track down her cheek, and it took every ounce of his self-control not to go to her, not to pull her away from this dead place and take her somewhere safe. But there was nowhere safe. "Try again," he said, hating how much of a command it still sounded. He needed to soften his approach. Before either could speak again, a sharp, piercing whistle cut through the dead air. A warning. His head snapped up. Kyle, from the North Ridge, his blood ran cold. He had been right. Their time was up. In that moment, everything shifted. The desperate hope, the frustration, it all vanished, burned away by pure, primal instinct. He launched himself toward Alara. "Get down!" he roared. As if the world narrowed, a black-fletched arrow hissed through the air where her head had been just a second before, thudding deep into the mud on the opposite bank. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. They were not alone.
The world exploded into chaos. Riker's roar was still echoing in the air when figures burst from the dead trees. They were like Riker, yet terrifyingly different. Leaner, wilder, their eyes glowing with a predatory red light. They moved with a fluid, terrifying speed, and the air was suddenly filled with the sound of snarling and the wet, tearing sound of claws meeting flesh. Riker shoved her behind him, his body a solid wall of muscle and fury. He didn't just stand there. He transformed. As if fire bloomed beneath his skin, he seemed to grow larger, his features sharpening, a low, rumbling growl ripping from his chest. This was the Alpha. This was the beast she had sensed coiled beneath his skin. Two of Riker's warriors met the attackers, and a brutal, vicious fight erupted. It was a whirlwind of violence, too fast for her eyes to truly follow, but there were too many of them. One of the red-eyed shifters, a massive brute with a cruel, scarred face, broke past the fighting, and he was coming straight for her. Time stood still. Her breath caught. There was nowhere to run. Riker was engaged with two others, his back to her. She was alone. The scarred shifter grinned, a terrifying display of sharp teeth. He lunged. Her world tilted. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a choice. It was pure, primal terror demanding an answer. She screamed, a raw, ragged sound, and threw her hands up in front of her face. It wasn't a flow of gentle, warm light. It was an explosion. The dead, muddy ground at her feet erupted. Thick, thorny vines, black as night, burst from the earth, whipping through the air like angry snakes. They wrapped around the scarred shifter's legs, throwing him off balance. He roared in shock and pain as the thorns, hard and sharp as daggers, tore at his flesh. But it didn't stop there. The very earth seemed to answer her terror. The ground beneath the shifter cracked, and a chasm opened up, swallowing him to his waist. He was trapped, roaring in fury and confusion. The clearing fell silent. The fighting stopped. Everyone, Riker's men and the red-eyed attackers, stared at her. At the impossible, violent display of her power. She lowered her hands, her whole body trembling. She looked at the thorny vines, at the trapped and bleeding shifter, at the raw, gaping wound in the earth. And she didn't know what scared her more, the monsters who had attacked her, or the monster that was apparently living inside of her.
Primal rage. The moment the arrow flew, the man in him vanished. The Alpha took over. The world sharpened into a landscape of threats and targets. His only thought, the only command that mattered, was a single, roaring word in his soul: protect. He met the first two attackers, his movements a blur of lethal efficiency. He was bigger, stronger. They were fast, but he was overwhelming. A broken arm, a dislocated shoulder. They were down, but not out. He heard her scream. The sound cut through his battle rage like a shard of ice to the heart. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the scarred bloodclaw Mavok lunging for her. A terror colder and sharper than any he had ever known seized him. He was too far. He wasn't going to make it. And then her power erupted. He felt it before he saw it. A tremor in the earth. A surge of wild, raw, angry magic that tasted of deep roots and stone and thorns. He watched, stunned, as the ground itself tore open to answer her scream, trapping Mavok in a prison of earth and thorns. His wolf went silent. The battle rage evaporated. All he could do was stare. This was not the gentle, life-giving warmth he had witnessed before. This was not healing. This was violence. This was defense. This was power on a scale he had never imagined. The other bloodclaws, seeing their packmate ensnared by what could only be described as blood magic, hesitated. That hesitation was all his warriors needed. Kale and Yorick pressed the attack, driving the remaining shifters back into the woods. But Riker didn't move. He couldn't. His mind was reeling, recalibrating everything he thought he knew. He had been trying to get her to heal a river. He had been trying to nurture a delicate flower. He had been a fool. She wasn't a flower. She was a slumbering volcano. She wasn't a key to a lock. She was a weapon of mass destruction. And the entire world had just seen the first demonstration. The stakes didn't just rise. They shattered the sky. The game wasn't about healing his land anymore. It was about surviving the war that was about to come for her. His gaze locked onto her. She was staring at her own hands, trembling, her face pale with shock. So fragile, so powerful. And she was his.
The silence after the chaos was deafening. The remaining attackers had vanished back into the dead woods. The scarred shifter, Mavok, was still trapped, snarling and bleeding in the prison of earth she had created. Her arms were shaking so badly she had to wrap them around herself to stop. She couldn't stop staring at the thorny vines. They had come from her. That violence, that raw, untamed power, it was hers. The thought made her feel sick. Riker's two warriors were tending to their wounds, but Riker himself, he was just standing there, staring at her. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. Was he angry? Horrified? Her chest ached with a new kind of fear. She had wanted to show him she could help. Instead, she had shown him she was a monster. He finally moved, his steps slow and deliberate as he approached her. Her breath caught. This was it. He would call her a witch, a demon. He would lock her back in the silver cage where she belonged. But he didn't stop in front of her. He walked right up to her, his large frame blocking out the gray light. He didn't speak. Instead, his hands came up, big and rough, and began to move over her, checking her arms, her shoulders, her face. His touch wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was urgent, desperate, almost frantic. He was checking for injuries, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce, wild fire she had never seen before. When he was satisfied she was unharmed, his hands fell to her shoulders, his grip firm, possessive. "Did they hurt you?" he asked, his voice a low, rough rasp. She could only shake her head, her throat too tight for words. "Good," he breathed. The tension broke. He looked from her to the trapped bloodclaw, and his face hardened into the alpha mask once more. But it was different now. It was sharper, colder, more dangerous than ever. "Kale!" he roared. "Get him out of there. Take him to the cells. I want to know who sent him." He turned back to her, his gaze locking with hers. The awe was gone. The hope was gone. In its place was a raw, feral protectiveness that was somehow more terrifying than his anger had ever been. He didn't see her as a key anymore. He didn't see her as a healer. He was looking at her like she was the most precious, most dangerous, and most hunted treasure in the entire world. And he was the dragon who had just claimed her.
He couldn't think. He could only feel. the terror of almost losing her, the staggering shock of her power. And now, a single, overwhelming, all-consuming instinct. Mine. The world could burn. His land could turn to dust. But no one would ever touch her again. His hands shook as he checked her for injuries. The thought of one of those blood-claw bastards putting their filthy claws on her made his vision go red. When he was sure she was unharmed, a wave of savage relief washed through him. He had been a fool, a blind, desperate fool. He had paraded her out in the open, trying to fix a leak in his house while a hurricane was gathering on the horizon. He had worried about the blight, a slow, creeping death. But this was a fast, violent death. The alphas of the other packs were not fools. Word of this would spread like wildfire. A shifter with earth magic? A woman who could command the land itself to fight for her? They wouldn't just want her. They would start a war for her. The game had changed. His priorities had changed. Saving the land was a luxury he could no longer afford. Now, there was only one thing that mattered. Keeping her, protecting her, hiding her from the world that would be coming to tear her apart. He gave his orders, his voice hard as stone. He watched Kale and Yorick haul the snarling Mavok from the earth, the vines receding back into the ground as Alara's control unknowingly faded. He turned back to her. She was still pale, still shaking. She looked at him with those wide, terrified eyes, and he knew she was expecting him to be angry. Let her be scared. Fear would keep her close. Fear would make her listen. From now on, he said, his voice low and absolute, leaving no room for argument. You do not leave my sight. You do not speak to anyone but me. You do not go anywhere without me. Her breath hitched. She was looking at him as if he were a stranger. Good. The man who had pleaded with her by the river was gone. He couldn't afford to be that man anymore. That man was weak. Only the Alpha could protect her now. Your room in the tower is no longer secure, he continued, his mind already formulating a new, ruthless plan. You will stay in my quarters. He saw the flash of panic in her eyes. The idea of such proximity, such confinement, clearly terrified her. He didn't care. He would lock her in a cage made of his own ribs if he had to. He reached out, his hand gently but firmly taking her arm. Come, he said. The war has just begun. And he would be damned if he was going to lose her in the first battle. She was his to protect, his to hide, his to keep, forever.
His quarters were a cage made of him. The scent of pine and wild winter air clung to the heavy furs on the massive bed and the worn leather of the armchair by the fire. It was everywhere, suffocating. And yet, her bones remembered him. The scent didn't just feel familiar, it felt like a missing piece of her own soul. He had left her here, with 2 guards posted outside the heavy oak door. His command had been absolute. Stay. But something had shifted in her after the attack at the river. She wasn't just a lost girl anymore. She was a person with a terrifying, untamed power bubbling just beneath her skin. And she would not be a passive doll locked in a tower. Her gaze fell on a potted plant on the windowsill. It was withered and brown, forgotten and dying. A test. She approached it, her heart thumping. She closed her eyes, ignoring the intimidating scent of the room, and focused inward. She didn't think of the thorns or the violent earth. Instead, she remembered the warmth she'd felt with the little boy, Caden. She remembered the feeling of pouring light. She reached out and gently touched a dead leaf. She imagined that warm, liquid light flowing down her arm, through her fingertips and into the plant. Live, she pleaded silently. Please, just live. For a long moment, nothing happened. But then, a faint green shimmer ran up the dry stem. As if the world narrowed, the brown, brittle leaf beneath her finger began to soften, to plump, to slowly, impossibly, unfurl into a shade of vibrant, healthy green. A gasp escaped her lips. It worked. She could control it. It wasn't just for defense. It was for life. A surge of heady, dangerous power flooded her. It was a secret she held in a room that belonged to him. It was the first piece of her own agency. Riker could lock the door. He could post his guards. But he couldn't cage the life that flowed through her veins, and she would not let him.
The dungeon stank of stale blood and fear. Mavok, the captured bloodclaw, was chained to the wall, his red eyes burning with hate. "Who sent you?" Riker's voice was dangerously quiet. Mavok just spat on the floor. "You're dead, Silvermoon Alpha. All of you." Riker's control snapped. In the span of a breath, he crossed the cell and slammed the shifter against the stone wall, his hand wrapped around the man's throat. Wrong answer. The fear that flashed in Mavok's eyes was deeply satisfying. "Kyle," the shifter choked out. "Alpha Kale of the Blood Claws." "I know the name," Riker growled. "Why does he want the girl?" "Not just a girl," Mavok gasped, a wild grin spreading across his face. "She's an Earth Witch, a primal. Kyle knows the legends. Her power isn't just for healing, it's for claiming. He who holds her holds the land. He will have her. He will have her." The words echoed in his mind, and a possessive, primal fury unlike anything he had ever known consumed him. The man, the Alpha, dissolved. Only the wolf remained, his vision tinted red. "Mine." The word was a silent roar in his soul. He threw Mavok back against the wall. He needed him alive for more information. But oh, how his wolf wanted to tear the man's throat out for even thinking her name. He left the dungeons, his mind racing. This was worse than he thought. Kyle wasn't just a rival. He was a zealot chasing a legend. And now, thanks to the skirmish at the river, Kale knew the legend was real. He would not stop. He would throw his entire pack at their gates to get to her. He had to make her understand. He couldn't just command her anymore. He needed her to fight with him. Willingly. He needed an ally. And he knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that to get one, he would have to give her a piece of himself he had never shown to anyone. A piece of his past. A truth buried in shame.
Riker stormed into the room like a thundercloud, his face a mask of controlled fury. She instinctively took a step back, her small moment of triumph with the plant evaporating. But his anger wasn't aimed at her. It was something darker, more widespread. "We have a problem," he bit out, pacing in front of the fireplace. "His name is Kale, and he wants you." Her heart hammered. "Why?" "Because he thinks you're a weapon to control the land, and he's not wrong," Riker said, finally stopping to look at her. The fire in his eyes was banked, replaced by a deep, weary weight. "If you're going to help me protect you, protect us, you need to know everything," he said, his voice dropping. A strange tension filled the room. This was a shift. He was offering something. "Then tell me," she challenged, finding a sliver of courage. "Tell me why this land is dying. What really happened here?" He stared into the fire for a long moment, the silence roaring between them. She thought he was going to refuse. But then he spoke, his voice low and laced with a shame that felt ancient. "My great-grandfather. He was a proud, arrogant alpha," Riker began. "The legends say this valley was ruled by a line of primal shifters, fey-blooded, who commanded the earth. They were the royals of the wood. The first alpha of my line made a pact with them, to guard their territory in exchange for prosperity. But my great-grandfather broke that pact." He paused, and his next words were heavy with disgust. He grew jealous of their power. He led an ambush, a slaughter. He killed them to take the valley for himself, believing their power would pass to him. But it didn't. Instead, their dying queen cursed the land with her final breath, a blight that would slowly poison the pack that betrayed her, until the rightful heir returned to claim her blood right, or all turned to dust. He finally looked at her, his golden eyes filled with the weight of his ancestors' sin. "I am the alpha of a stolen, dying land, Alara. That is the truth of it." Her breath caught. He had used her name. Her real name, given by the Den Mother. In that moment, he wasn't her captor. He wasn't the fearsome alpha. He was just a man, trapped by the sins of his fathers, desperately trying to save his people. And her heart, foolishly, treacherously, broke for him.
As the truth hung in the air between them, a new understanding dawning in her eyes, the warning horn blew. A long, desperate blast that meant only one thing, a full-scale assault. "Kyle," he snarled. The bastard hadn't wasted a moment. "Stay here," he commanded Alara, the alpha taking over once more. He drew a wicked-looking blade from a chest at the foot of his bed. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "My fight, too." He didn't have time to argue. He could already hear the sounds of battle, the roars of shifters and the splintering of wood from the main gate. He burst from the room, Alara right on his heels. The great hall was chaos. Blood claws were pouring through a breach in the main wall, their red eyes glowing with fanaticism. His warriors met them, a desperate line of defense. He waded into the fray, a blur of fury and steel. He was fighting for more than his pack now. He was fighting for her, for the future she represented. He saw Kale, a massive red-furred shifter with cruel, intelligent eyes, directing the attack, always trying to press toward the keep, toward her. A bloodclaw lunged at him from the side. He dispatched him with a vicious backhand, but another took his place. He was being swarmed. He felt a searing pain in his side as a claw raked across his ribs. Deep. A roar of pain and fury ripped from his throat. He stumbled back a step, his vision swimming. He looked up and his blood ran cold. Kale had used the opening. He was making a dash for the doorway where Alara stood, her face pale with terror. No. But then, her expression changed. As her eyes landed on the blood soaking his side, her terror vanished, replaced by a cold, protective rage that mirrored his own. She stepped forward. She raised her hands, and the stone floor of the great hall moved. With a sound like grinding continents, a solid wall of stone erupted from the floor, sealing the breach in the wall, knocking attackers aside and blocking Kale's path. It wasn't wild and chaotic like at the river. This was controlled, focused, powerful. The tide of the battle turned in an instant. He stared, leaning against a pillar, his side screaming in agony. He watched her, this impossible girl, standing amidst the chaos, her hands still raised, her jaw set with determination. In the echo of her power, he felt a surge of fierce, breathtaking pride. She wasn't a key, she wasn't a weapon. She was his queen, and she had just chosen her throne.
The stone wall she had raised stood as a monument in the center of the great hall. The attack was over. The silence that followed was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the low groans of the wounded. Her gaze was fixed on Riker. He was leaning against a pillar, his hand pressed to his side, his face pale beneath a sheen of sweat. The dark stain of blood was spreading across his tunic. Before she could think, she was moving. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice trembling as she reached him. "It's nothing," he gritted out, but a wave of dizziness made him sway. "Let me," she said, her voice firm. She placed her hand over his on top of the wound. The memory of healing the plant, of healing Caden, was fresh in her mind. She closed her eyes and called to the warmth, the light. "Live." It answered her. A soft, gentle heat flowed from her palm, sinking through his tunic, through his hand, and into the wound beneath. She felt the torn muscle knitting back together, the bleeding slowing and then stopping. It took a massive effort, draining her until her knees felt weak, but it worked. He let out a sharp, surprised breath. When she pulled her hand away, he looked down, then back at her, his golden eyes wide with a new layer of awe. But then, a warrior, his face grim and splattered with dirt, burst into the hall. "Alpha!" Riker was instantly alert, the pain forgotten. "What is it, Jorik?" "Scouts from the South Ridge," the warrior panted. "They've spotted banners. Not blood claws. It's the Stonehide pack. And our watchers on the West Peak report the Shadowrunners are on the move." Riker went completely still. All of them? Yes, Alpha, Jorek said, his voice grim. They aren't fighting each other. They're all marching here. The warmth of her small victory vanished, replaced by an icy dread. She looked at her own hands, the hands that had just healed him, the hands that had raised a wall of stone. Her power hadn't saved them. It had been a beacon, a massive, shining beacon, and now every monster in the forest was coming for the light.
The warmth of her healing touch was a miracle. It spread through his side, chasing away the fire of the wound, leaving behind a strange, tingling sense of life. His mind reeled with the implications. She could heal, she could fight. She was everything. For one brief, shining moment, he felt invincible. Then Yorek's words shattered it all. Stone hides, shadow runners, two of the most ruthless packs on the continent. Not opportunistic scavengers like the Blood Claws, but conquering armies. And they were coming for him. For her. The air in his lungs turned to ice. His grand victory in the hall just now was nothing. It was a child's game. The real war was just beginning. He had repelled a scouting party, and in doing so had announced to the world that the legends were true. He was harboring a primal power, and he was too weak to hold her. How long? He snapped, his mind shifting into the cold, hard calculus of a besieged alpha. 2 days, 3 at most, Jorek answered. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for an army, for 2 armies. His pack was already battered, wounded. They stood no chance. His gaze fell on Ilara. She was pale, her eyes wide with a dawning horror as she understood the meaning of the warrior's words. She was looking at her own hands as if they were poison. The guilt was already starting to consume her, and in that moment, a cold, ruthless clarity descended upon him. His number one priority was no longer the pack, it was no longer the land. Those were battles he was about to lose. His only priority was her. He had to get her away, to hide her. But where? They knew she was here. They would tear his keep apart stone by stone to find her. He looked at her, at the immense, untamed power she held, and the crushing guilt he saw in her eyes. And he knew his enemies had another weapon to use against him, her own compassion. If she thought for 1 second that her surrender would save his people, she would walk out the front gate and give herself to them. He could not let that happen. Ever. Double the patrols, he ordered Jorek, his voice like flint. Barricade every entrance, we make our stand here. But as he spoke the words, his eyes were on Ilara, and a darker, more desperate plan began to form in the back of his mind. A plan that felt like a betrayal. A plan that felt like the only way.
The keep transformed into a fortress preparing for its own funeral. The air was thick with the grim tension of impending doom. Every warrior she saw had a look of hard, fatalistic resolve, and every single one of them looked at her with a mixture of awe and resentment. She was their miracle, and she was their curse. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. This was her fault, all of it. The armies weren't marching on the Silver Moon Pack. They were marching on her. She had to find a way to fix it. She sought out the only person she knew who might offer wisdom instead of fear. The Den Mother. She found the elder Ilara in the makeshift infirmary, tending to a young warrior whose leg had been mangled in the fight. Den Mother, she began, her voice small. The elder Ilara looked up, her warm eyes tired but still kind. Child, your face is pale. What can I do? Ilara asked, her voice cracking. How can I stop this? They're coming because of me. They are coming because of their own greed, the Den Mother corrected gently, tying off a bandage. Power does not corrupt, little one. Fear corrupts, the fear of not having power. She sighed, looking around the hall at the wounded. I must go to the western outpost. They were hit hard in the first wave, and their healer fell. They need herbs and comfort. Is it safe? Ilara asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Nowhere is safe, the Den Mother said with a sad smile. But we do what we must until we cannot. That is the way. She patted Alara's hand. Do not blame yourself for the storm. Just learn to be the strong tree that will not break in the wind. Those were the last words she would ever say to her. An hour later, a cry went up from the walls. A scout had returned, carrying the den mother's woolen cloak. It was stained with blood. A targeted strike. A single poisoned arrow. Kale's assassins hadn't launched another attack. They had simply taken the heart of the pack. The news ripped through the keep, a wave of grief and despair. But for Alara, it was a knife twisting in her soul. The one person who had shown her unconditional kindness. The one person who had given her a name and hope. Gone. Because of her. The storm had come, and it had broken the strongest tree of all.
The news of the den mother's death was a crippling blow. She had been his mother's dearest friend, a pillar of his pack since before he was born. Kale wasn't just laying siege. He was engaging in psychological warfare. He was cutting them apart piece by piece, aiming for their heart, their morale. He found Alara in the now empty infirmary, standing by the cot where the den mother had been working. She was unnaturally still, her face a mask of utter hollow despair. The light he had seen in her, the fire, the life, it was gone, snuffed out. It's my fault, she whispered to the empty room. All of this. It's all my fault. He saw it in her eyes then, a terrible, quiet resolve. She was going to do something stupid. She was going to walk out there, give herself up, believing her sacrifice would save them. The very thought sent a shard of ice through his heart. He had lost his land. He was losing his pack. He would not lose her. Alara, he said, his voice rough. She turned to him and her eyes were empty. Make it stop, Riker. Please, just tell me how to make it stop. And in that moment, his own hope died. He saw the only path left. A dark, ugly path, but the only one he could see that ended with her still breathing. I will, he said, his voice flat. He crossed the room to her. She looked up at him, a flicker of trust in her desolate gaze. What do I do? He didn't answer. He simply took her arm. His touch wasn't rough, but it was absolute, unyielding. He led her from the hall down a dark corridor she didn't recognize, toward the dungeons. Riker? She asked, her voice trembling as she realized where they were going. What are you doing? He didn't answer. He couldn't. If he spoke, his voice would break. If he spoke, the wolf inside him would howl its betrayal. He stopped before a solid iron door, far stronger than her old cell, a supply vault. He opened it, revealing a small, dark space. Riker, no, she begged, pulling against his grip, the life finally returning to her eyes in the form of pure, panicked terror. Please, don't do this. We're a team. You said, I'm sorry, he choked out, the words tasting like ash. He gently but irresistibly pushed her inside. I'm doing this to keep you alive. He ignored her cries, her pleas. He shut the heavy door. The sound of the bolt sliding home was the sound of his own soul breaking. He leaned his forehead against the cold iron, listening to her shattered sobs on the other side. He had saved her life, and he had just destroyed her. He had destroyed them. All was lost.
Darkness and silence. The despair was a physical thing, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered all thought, all feeling. He had locked her away. After everything, the shared secrets, the healing, the fight they had won together, he had looked at her and seen nothing but a problem to be caged. The trust she had placed in him, so fragile and new, had shattered into dust. She curled into a ball on the cold stone floor, empty. There were no more tears to cry. There was nothing left. She was a curse. Her power brought only death and betrayal. She had lost the den mother. She had lost Riker. She had lost herself. She closed her eyes, wishing the darkness would just swallow her whole. And in the absolute perfect void of her surrender, something broke free. It wasn't a vision. It was memory. A flash of a woman's loving smile, her hair the color of spun moonlight. A man with kind eyes the color of warm amber, swinging her high into the air, her own childish laughter echoing through a sun-drenched hall. The scent of roses and old books. Her mother. Her father. The memory slammed into another. Shouts. The clash of steel. The scent of blood. Her mother shoving her into a hidden alcove behind a tapestry, her face a mask of terror. "Your name is Ilara," she whispered fiercely. "You are the blood of the earth and the sky. No matter what happens, you must live. Live, my daughter." She saw the tapestry ripped aside. She saw the flash of a sword with a snarling wolf's head on its hilt. She saw her parents fall. The pain of the memory was so intense, it was a physical blow. It ripped through her despair, burning it away like a forest fire. She wasn't a nameless girl. She wasn't Jane. Her name was Ilara, and she was the daughter of the murdered king and queen of this land. The curse wasn't just a blight. It was the echo of her parents' stolen life force. The prophecy wasn't about a key. It was about a reckoning. As the truth unraveled, a cold, hard resolve settled in her bones, reforging her shattered spirit into something new, something sharp, something dangerous. She was not a curse. She was the cure. And her grief would be the fire that burned her enemies to the ground.
He stood on the battlements, watching the enemy campfires twinkle in the distance like a constellation of death. They were surrounded. Come morning, the final assault would begin. His pack would be annihilated. He felt nothing. The alpha in him was a hollow shell, going through the motions of command. The man was a ghost, haunted by the sound of her broken sobs. The wolf was silent, its spirit crushed by his betrayal of their mate. He had condemned them all. He couldn't stand it any longer. He had to see her. He had to explain. He had to apologize before the end came. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, but he couldn't die as the monster who had locked her away in the dark. He walked to the iron door of the vault, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. He took a deep breath, preparing for her tears, for her hatred. He deserved it all. He slid the bolt open. The woman who stood in the darkness was not the broken girl he had left there. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her eyes clear and blazing with a light he had never seen before. The fear, the grief, the despair, all gone. In its place was an aura of calm, immense and terrifying power. She was not his prisoner. She had never been his prisoner. He had been a fool guarding a queen. "My name is Ilara," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with the authority of ages. "I am the last of the primal line your ancestor murdered. This blight is the scar left by my family's death." She took a step forward, out of the darkness and into the torchlight. And he saw it. A faint, shimmering sigil, a crowned tree, was glowing on her shoulder, right where his pack mark should have been. It had been there all along, hidden, waiting. "Your family's curse is my birthright," she declared, her eyes locking with his. "And I am the only one who can end it. Now get out of my way. I have a kingdom to reclaim."
He stared at her, his golden eyes wide with shock. The sight of the glowing mark on her shoulder, the truth in her words, it all hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his alpha arrogance crumbling into dust. She walked past him, her head held high. The fear she used to feel in his presence was gone. He was no longer the storm. He was just a man standing in her path. "The heart tree," she said, her mind clear and focused. "That is the center of it all. It is not dead. It is sleeping. It is waiting for me." "Kale and his armies are at the gate," Riker said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We can't get to it." "You can't," she corrected him, turning to face him fully. The power she felt was a calm, steady river flowing through her. "But I can. And you. You will clear my path." It wasn't a request. In that moment, she was not asking for his help. She was telling her alpha, the alpha of the pack sworn by ancient pact to protect her bloodline, what his duty was. The shift in power was absolute. He was no longer her captor. He was her sworn shield. And in his eyes, she saw not resentment, but a dawning, reverent awe. He saw the truth, and he saw his own redemption. "Tell me what you need," he said, his voice filled with a new, fierce purpose. "I need your warriors," she said. "Not to win, not to survive. I need them to buy me time. Form a wedge, a spear, and you will be its tip. You will drive a path through Kale's army straight to the heart tree. I only need to get to the tree. The land will do the rest." It was an insane plan, a suicide mission, to charge directly into the heart of an army that outnumbered them 10-1. But as she looked at him, she saw no doubt. Only the fierce, unwavering loyalty of a wolf who has finally found his true alpha, his true queen.
He followed her out of the dungeons and into the great hall. His warriors, what was left of them, were gathered there, their faces grim, their eyes hollow with the acceptance of their own impending deaths. They were preparing to die for their homes. He watched Ilara walk to the center of the room. She was just one woman, small against the backdrop of hulking, scarred warriors. But when she spoke, her voice cut through the despair like a bolt of lightning. "Warriors of the Silver Moon," she called out, her voice clear and ringing with an impossible power. "You fight for a dying land, for a pack cursed by a broken oath." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. They stared at her, confused. She pushed the sleeve of her shift aside, revealing the glowing sigil of the crown tree on her shoulder. "My name is Ilara, and I am the last daughter of the line your first alpha swore to protect, the line your ancestors betrayed." A collective gasp went through the hall. They stared at the glowing mark, the symbol from their oldest legends. "The blight upon this land is the shadow of my family's murder," she declared, her voice rising with power. "The armies at our gate are the greedy sons of the usurpers who stole my throne. You have been fighting to defend a cage of shame. But today you fight for a chance at redemption. You will not fight to survive. You will fight to clear a path for your queen. You will escort me to the heart tree, and I will reclaim my birthright and heal this land once and for all." The silence that followed was absolute. The warriors stared, their eyes wide with disbelief, with dawning, impossible hope. He drew his great sword. The sound of steel ringing through the hall broke the spell. He strode to her side, turned to face his pack, and dropped to one knee. He held his sword out flat before him, an offering, an oath. "My life and my blade are yours," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My queen." For a moment, there was only the sound of breathing. Then Yorick, his second in command, let out a roar and dropped to his knee. Then Kale. Then another and another until every warrior in the hall was kneeling, their weapons offered, their faces alight with a new ferocious fire. They were no longer dying men. They were the Queen's Guard, and they were ready to charge into the heart of hell for her. This was not a battle for survival. It was an act of faith. "For the Queen!" he roared, and his voice was joined by the 100 warriors left to him. They slammed their shields together, a single defiant sound against the screams of an army, and they charged. He was the tip of the spear, a whirlwind of steel and fury. His great sword sang a song of death as he carved a path through the sea of snarling blood claws. He didn't feel the pain from his old wounds. He felt nothing but his singular, holy purpose: clear the way. Kyle, his red fur a bloody banner in the chaos, met his charge. "The witch is mine," the rival alpha snarled. "You will not touch her," Riker roared back, and their blades met with a scream of tortured metal. He pushed the battle forward step by bloody step. Behind him, his warriors formed a living wall, a wedge protecting Ilara as she walked calmly through the heart of the storm. She was a serene island in a sea of violence. They were feet from the heart tree when Kale broke through his guard, landing a vicious blow that sent Riker staggering to one knee. The red-furred alpha grinned, raising his axe for the final blow. This was it. He had failed. But then he saw her. Alara had reached the tree. She placed her hands on the dead gray bark, and the world ended. A wave of pure golden light, blinding and silent, erupted from the tree. It wasn't a blast of force. It was a wave of life. It washed over him, and the pain in his side vanished. His exhaustion evaporated. It washed over his warriors, sealing their wounds, renewing their strength. It washed over Kale and his army, and they screamed as it touched them. It wasn't a burn. It was the feeling of life itself rejecting their blighted, greedy souls. The raw power threw them backward, sending them tumbling through the air. The battle was over. Just like that. In the stunning silence, a single green leaf unfurled on the heart tree, then another, and another. Life, vibrant and overwhelming, flooded the valley. The gray earth turned to rich black soil. The dead trees bloomed. The sky itself seemed to turn a brighter shade of blue. He looked at her, standing by the now living tree, her body haloed in a soft, golden light. She had not just saved them. She had remade the world.
The moment her hands touched the tree, she was home. It wasn't a vision or a memory. She connected with the very soul of the land, a vast, sleeping consciousness that recognized her, its lost daughter. She felt its pain, its loneliness, its long, long wait. And she opened her heart, pouring all the love from her rediscovered memories, all the light she held, into the tree. "I am here," she whispered to it. "Wake up." It answered her with a wave of life so powerful it took her breath away. The golden light that erupted from her was not her own. It was the land's joyful, triumphant shout of her return. She felt the blight dissolve, the poison recede, the life pour back into every leaf and stream and blade of grass. When it was over, she was drained, but she had never felt more whole. She turned. The armies of her enemies were scattered, groaning, their will to fight completely broken. Kale stared at her, his red eyes wide with terror and disbelief. But her gaze found Riker. He was walking toward her, his face a mask of utter, reverent awe. He stopped a few feet away, his golden eyes shining with unshed tears. He was no longer looking at his mate, or his prisoner, or his secret weapon. He was looking at his salvation. Then he did something that sealed their new world into place. He dropped to one knee. In front of his warriors, in front of his defeated enemies, he laid his great sword on the now fertile ground. "I, Riker of the blood of the silver moon," he began, his voice ringing with a new clear oath, "do swear my life, my pack, and my sword to you, Alara, queen of the primal wood and rightful heir of the land. The broken pact is mended. My blood will serve yours, now and forever." The silence was broken by a single, collective sound as every Silver Moon warrior dropped to their knees, their heads bowed, not in defeat, but in absolute joyful fealty. Her heart swelled. This wasn't a victory in a battle. This was the healing of a world, and the forging of a bond between her and her people, and between her and her brave, foolish, redeemed wolf, that would never be broken again.
Weeks later, he stood on the balcony of the great keep, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and rose. The air that drifted up from the valley was sweet with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and damp living earth. The land was not just healed, it was singing. He was no longer the Alpha. The title felt like a relic from another lifetime, a hollow echo. His purpose was simpler now, and far more profound. He heard a soft footstep and turned. Alara stood there, a simple crown of woven, living silver leaves resting on her moon-colored hair. She came to stand beside him, her hand finding his. Her touch was not just the touch of his mate. It was the touch of his queen, his partner, the center of his world. "The emissaries from the Stonehide Pack left this morning," she said, her voice calm and sure. "They have sworn fealty. Kyle and the Bloodclaws have been banished to the barren lands by joint decree." "You are a good queen," he said, his voice thick with a pride that filled his entire being. "I have a good royal consort," she answered, a warm smile gracing her lips as she leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. The restless, angry wolf that had lived inside him for so long was finally at peace, purring with a deep, rumbling contentment. He was no longer a failing leader, haunted by the sins of his ancestors. He was the shield and heart of the woman who had remade the world. Their relationship, born in a cage of stone and silver, had been reforged into something true, a partnership of equals. He was her strength, and she was his life. There would be challenges. There were kingdoms to build and alliances to forge. But as he looked out at the vibrant, thriving valley, and then down at the incredible woman in his arms, he knew they would face it all together. He had started by locking her in a cage to save his world, and she had ended by setting them all free.
She leaned against his solid warmth, the steady beat of his heart a comforting rhythm against her ear. The nightmares were gone. The fear was gone. The loneliness was gone. She was home. The journey had been one of fire and terror, of betrayal and impossible choices. But it had led her here, to this moment of peace, to this man. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her hair. She smiled, looking out at the endless green of their new kingdom. "I was thinking about a promise," she said softly. "A promise of a living forest. I think I'm finally there." He turned her to face him, his golden eyes soft and filled with a love so deep it took her breath away. He was her captor, her savior, her warrior, her partner, her everything. "Welcome home, my queen," he whispered. And as he lowered his head to kiss her, she knew with every fiber of her being that this was not an ending. It was the beginning of their forever.
Thank you so much for watching this video. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. If you enjoyed what you saw, we've got a whole library of other videos packed with more great content just like this waiting for you on our channel. So, why not dive into another one right now? And hey, if you want to make sure you don't miss out on our next upload, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We'd love to have you join our community and see you in the next video. Thanks again.